Hi, welcome to this video looking at question 2, question 4 of the EDUQAS GCSE English language. This question is looking at how well do you think Scott's diary captures his feelings about his journey to the South Pole. This is the evaluation stroke impressions question for the non-fiction text. So there it is, question 4. So for question 4, the key facts we got to know about it. How many marks? Is 10 marks. How many points or quotes should you make? I'd say 6 to 8 points with quotes. What are the marks given for? Clear points related to quote, quotes to support points, terminology for how the writer presents impression, and also you need to give your opinion reaction to the text in some way. What do you need to avoid? Waffling. So we don't want massive 7-line paragraphs for 1 point. We want loads of points, loads of quotes. So the question is again, how well do you think Scott's diary captures his feelings about his journey to the South Pole? You should comment on what his feelings are about the expedition over the 3 diary entries, 3 separate days. How well do you think his diary makes his feelings clear? So here's the text. If you want to pause the video and read it, otherwise have a look in my description of this video and there will be a link to see how you get the exam paper. So it's a 10-mark question, so you should be spending 13 to 15 minutes on it. Okay, so we're looking at how many points or quotes. Well, we just talked about it, so looking at 5, 6, 7, 8 quotes. If we haven't got the time, just do 5 or 6. If you've got a bit more time, 7 or 8. So you need to use a range of quotes like I just said, but also it's really important it's from the beginning, middle and end of the extract. So we don't just want lots taken from the start of the extract like we've got here. We want to track. The exam board like the use of the word tracking the text. That means going through all the way through and finding bits that we're going to talk about, start, middle and end. So question 4 is very much like question 2, it's the how question. It's looking at language, but we're also going to add your own opinion. You've got to give your own opinion on how well you think the writer has done something. So you've got to comment on the effect of the words, and you've also got to think to yourself, how do they make the reader feel? So the writer has chosen these words on purpose. So for example, this exam question is looking at how things are difficult and So for example, this question is looking at how well Scott captures feelings. So we're going to look at the feelings that Scott has and then say, how does the writer, why has the writer chosen particular words to get that across to the reader? So we're looking where a writer deliberately uses words to achieve a special effect. So really obvious example, really small example. Say we've got a sentence, there was a crack in the ice. So we've got this picture here. That might mean like a small little crack that isn't a big danger. However, if we change that to there was a giant crack in the ice, so we use an adjective, giant. Well, why is the writer could have just put crack, but they've decided to use that adjective giant for a reason, and they've decided to use it to get across to the reader that the crack was almost like this, almost was a huge, giant, enormous, intimidating, powerful, violent crack. That makes it much more interesting for the reader, and we get to know Scott's feelings more because it's not just a small thing, but a giant thing that's almost life-threatening. So if we look at that, so giant suggests the crack was intimidating, enormous and emphasised the danger. So all I'm saying is why the writer has chosen that word and what are the connotations. So in this question we're looking at using terminology, so these things here, adjectives, verbs, word choice and so on. However, it's really important you get to revise these because you're going to do better if you can say that as an adjective. You're not going to get marks for just saying it's an adjective. You're going to say what effect the adjective has. But it's really important that you try and revise all this terminology. However, if you can't get it into your head, it is much better than just saying the word giant and getting it and just saying that rather than saying, for example, the verb giant and getting it wrong. Obviously we want to get it right to get really high marks, but if you don't know it, it's better to just say the word rather than get it wrong. Obviously we want to say the adjective giant to really get to the top marks. So although I just said we're going to use terminology, you're not going to use every single point. So if you're doing 5 or 6 or 7, maybe use the terminology 3 or 4 times. We don't want to hit the examiner over the head with it. We don't want to seem like we're forcing the terminology down their throats. But definitely use it maybe 50% of the time. So remember the question is how well do you think, so us as readers think Scott captures his feelings about the poll, what his feelings and how he communicates these feelings. So you're going to be focused on your response to the text, so what you think is the text. So your response to the text will be different from what your classmates will be. So just focus on what you think. However, generally you're probably going to say the writer does things well, then spend all your time saying you think they were rubbish. Okay, so your response. So an example would be, at the start I feel Scott captures his feelings well. Scott makes it clear he is tired when. Scott is successful showing his pain when. So obviously then we're going to talk about the quotes, but these sentence starters are really going to help us. So you're going to look for language in the text that captures how he feels about the expedition. So does he feel tired? Does he feel frustrated, angry, happy, whatever? So then we're going to zoom in. We don't want huge quotes. We don't want you writing out a sentence and a half. We're just looking for 1 or 2 word quotes, so words and phrases. So here's the extract. So look at your copy or read from the video if you want to. And I'm just going to look at the first day. Remember, we're going to comment on the 3 days in the answer, but just for now, just with us, we're going to look at the first day. So this is the first day extract. This is the Tuesday. And I'm going to look for language that captures how he feels about the trip. So I'm just going to do a 2 or 3 here, and then you can have a go. So the first thing I'm going to pick out is, he doesn't just say he woke to a blizzard, it was a raging, howling blizzard. So why has the writer used those adjectives, raging and howling? Well, for me, it almost suggests that the weather is intimidating and frightening. Raging is almost something that is angry. Here, he didn't just have a breakfast, the adjective thin is used. So that suggests, well, how does he feel? Well, it suggests that he doesn't feel happy with his breakfast. He suggests that thin suggests starving, unhappy. It's an adjective that suggests fragility, someone who is weak. And let's look at one more together. And then he says, we had our own share of ill fortune. Well, what does that tell me about his feelings? Well, he suggests ill fortune. It suggests that he feels like he's had a lot of bad luck on the trip. So now I want you to do is, after you have a look at that, it's your turn. So look for 3 more words and phrases from the first day that capture how we feel. So I just want you to look at the first day. So this paragraph, this diary entry, we're going to look at the other ones later in the video. But just for now, have a look at the video, have a look at your exam, highlight 3 more words or phrases that capture how it feels, and try to make the same kind of analysis and notes that we've done on this part of the video here. So here's my annotation. So we've talked about raging, howling blizzard. We've talked about thin breakfast. We've talked about ill fortune. However, we could say the writer purposely uses a rhetorical question. What on earth does such weather mean at this time of year? So what on earth almost suggests he's bewildered. He can't believe what has happened. Then the superlative greatest is used. So it's not just a snowfall. It's the greatest. So it means he's never seen anything as bad as this snowfall, as much snow come down ever. So that shows you it's pretty bad. Then we say it's pretty wretched. Then he uses repetition. He doesn't just say it's wet, he says it's very, very wet. So the repetition of that adjective just tells the reader that he's obviously feeling really miserable. He's absolutely soaked through. And the last bit of the day, he says he has biscuits, although the last of the horse meat. So then we could probably look at that and say, although it's nice that he's had the horse meat, he's happy as the horse meat, it then gets negative again because it's the last of it. So he did have a small pleasure, but that small pleasure is now gone. So now we're going to analyse these words and phrases in a bit more detail and explain their effect. So raging, so it said it was a raging blizzard. So what do we look at when we think raging? We think of this sort of thing, don't we? Someone who is angry, someone who is violent, like this image here. So what do connotations mean? Well, the connotations are the images or ideas associated with a word or phrase. So what would I associate with raging? Well, I'd probably associate these things: explosive, volatile, violent, horror, angry, intimidating. So all these things are connotations of the word raging. So when the writer has used that word, these are the things that they want the reader to get into their heads. So again, with thin, what can we say about the connotations with thin? I'd say small, food, fragile, hungry, starving, weak. So if he feels like this, Scott feels like this when he's eating, we're meant to infer from that he is feeling fragile, he's feeling weak. These are his feelings that the writer is getting across to us, that he needs food, that he's hungry, that he's starving. Okay, now pause the video or do whatever you want to do, but here's have a go at doing these 2 or maybe just one. So pick howling, what connotations do we do with that? Pick greatest, what connotations do we have with greatest? So, greatest, let's look at that one. What connotations does it have? And number 2, why has the writer chosen to use it? This is basically what the question is. Why has the writer chosen the words, and what effect does it have? So greatest, I would say, it means the best, it means the most, it means enormous. If something's great, it's strong. So how are we going to structure our answer? Okay, remember the question is, how well do you think Scott captures his feelings? What are his feelings? How does he make them clear? So number 1, I'm going to use the sentence starter. I feel Scott is successful with capturing his feelings. So remember the question is, what is my opinion? And my opinion is that he's successful. Yeah, so he's doing it well. So that's my sentence starter. Number 2, I'm going to use an adjective and technique. So what has he done? Well, I'm going to say he's used a powerful adjective, a peaceful simile, or violent verb. So what I'm saying is, what technique has the writer used? I'm going to look at adjective, and what kind of adjective is it? Well, is it a peaceful one? Is it a calm? Is it violent? Well, I'm going to say I'm going to be talking about raging and howling. So I'm going to say he's going to use powerful adjectives. So that's number 2, adjective and quote. Number 3 is the quote. Okay, so what quote? The quote I'm using is raging or howling. So I feel Scott is successful with capturing his feelings by using the powerful adjectives raging and howling. Okay, and what does it show? To show how terrible the weather was. And what are the connotations of raging? Well, raging, we've already talked about with this image. Raging suggests the weather is violent and intimidating. Okay, so put it together, I feel Scott is successful with capturing his feelings by using the powerful adjectives raging and howling. To show how bad the weather was, raging suggests the weather is violent and intimidating. And then after that I would talk about howling. So all I've done there is said what the writer does to show his feelings, what quote he's chosen, and why have they chosen that quote. And there it is all together. So I want you to have a look at the rest of it and try to have a look at these quotes and see if you can make 3 answers. So pick 3 of the 5 and see if you can do an answer like what I've just done based on these quotes. Use any sheets or the structure we've just gone through to help you. Okay, so after you've done that, use the whole extract now. Remember, we've only used the first day so far, and highlight 5 words or phrases, 1 or 2 words, that capture how Scott feels through the journey, and then we'll go through it. So if we're looking at the rest of the extract, we've done the top paragraph. Okay, so miserable, utterly miserable. So we've got repetition there. Also, we've got short sentences. Also, we've got adverbs. So we've got 3 things in that little 3 words we could talk about. So miserable, miserable. So the repetition emphasises his feelings, how awful he's feeling. And so does the adverb. And the short sentences even picks out more for the reader. So really, it's almost like an explicit tie to the reader how fed up he is. Then it said the wind, the tempest, so the weather continues to rage violently. Again, it's an aggressive adverb. It's not just falling, but rage is anger. So we've almost got 2 words there that scream anger and violence. Then it says the snow is steadily climbing higher above the walls. So that means the snow is getting worse, and then it's steadily climbing. So the adverb steadily suggests that bit by bit it's getting up. There's almost like no way out, no way they're going to stop it. Then it says a hopeless feeling descends. So obviously he's feeling sort of panicked. He's feeling like there's no way out. And then sort of at the bottom there, I've put sum up 10. So one thing you will get marks on for in this question is documenting the progress of change. So all the way through, we are 3-dimensional. We're not going to have the same feeling for 3 days. So there will be some permutations, some changes in the way he feels. And this last couple of sentences here, we could argue there's some sort of positivity there. So instead of saying how words like miserable, we're getting words like pleasant. Yeah, so a bit of a change. However, in the 3rd day, we go back down in mood to maybe losing hope. So he now says it's now serious. So even though it might have sounded awful before, the word now serious suggests that it's really getting bleak. Then it says that he's feeling obviously miserable because they think they might have to kill the animals, which obviously is going to make the trip even more difficult. And then it says there's no sign of dying down, no sign of an end. So obviously there's no way they think they're going to get out, but also the repetition of no sign suggests that there's no indication they're going to get out of this. And then it says utterly impossible. So impossible is a really strong word, and all these things in this paragraph here suggest that he's lost hope. He's lost hope of maybe getting out of the situation he's found himself in. So here's a little box that might help us for this question. So in the white is the quote, and in the blue is the technique and how does it show his feelings. We'll go through a few together and then you can maybe finish the table. So we've talked about the raging, howling blizzard. So what technique is used? Raging and howling is an adjective. How does it show his feelings? Well, it shows that he's feeling angry or intimidated by the weather. That's meant to say violent. Thin breakfast, well, again, the adjective is the technique, and what is it? How does it show? It shows us he's starving, he's unhappy, he's feeling weak. Very, very wet. So what technique do you think is being used there? Miserable, utterly miserable. So short sentences, but what other techniques? We've talked about it. So all the way through, just say what technique has been used and how does it show the feelings, and complete the blue box. So we want to write our answers in order, top through bottom. So we don't want an answer from the top paragraph, then one from the bottom paragraph, and switching all the way through. So go through in a nice order, top to bottom, the things you've highlighted. And if you want to get top marks, we need to do the things that I've just mentioned. So look at the way this animal changes. So we need a comment on the change of feeling that Scott has over the whole extract. So not just for this extract, whatever question number you have on a different exam, you need a comment on the change, the feelings that the person has. It's very unlikely that the person is going to have to feel the same way all the way through. So talking about commenting on the change of feelings that Scott has over the whole extract, I want you to look at each day, the Tuesday, the Wednesday and the Thursday, and summarise Scott's feelings in 2 or 3 words. Okay, so so day 1, day 2, just give me a few words to describe how he feels. So I would say day 1 he's angry and frustrated, day 2 he's miserable but there are some positives, and then day 3 I would say the feelings are that there's no hope. So if we comment on them in their answer, we're going to be looking towards the top end. So here's all the things that we're going to talk about. I've got 8 here. You probably would need 5 because although I said you want 6 or 7 or 8 quotes, I've probably got a couple of quotes in each of these points I'm making. So if you use 7 or 8 quotes, you're going to be doing really well. So there's my 8, and you probably would need 5 or 6. And in the red here is where I've highlighted my quotes. Okay, and you want to get to top marks, then you're going to comment on the change, like I said. So in my red here, I'm not going to analyse the paragraphs, I'm just going to show you what I've highlighted in red. So on number 1 I've put on the first day, Scott blah blah blah. Number 2, I feel Scott's feelings become more positive. 3, however, we sense a negative change in Scott's feelings. So just 3 times during my whole answer I've commented on the change of feelings that Scott has. So let's look at each quote in detail. So we've done this one. The quote is raging or howling. I feel Scott is successful with capturing his feelings by using the powerful adjectives. Raging, howling to show how bad the weather was. Raging suggests the weather is violent and intimidating Scott. Howling is a negative adjective which makes the reader feel the storm is a haunting and painful presence. So my red is my point, my black is my quote, and my blue is my connotation. What does the quote suggest? So all I'm saying is why has the writer used the word raging? Why has the writer used the word howling? What does howling mean? Well, it's negative and it suggests like a haunting, almost like a ghost, almost a painful experience. Thin breakfast. On the first day, Scott successfully shows his frustration and unhappiness with his thin breakfast. Okay, so why has thin been used by the writer? This adjective shows Scott and the rest of the group are starving, weak and fragile. This shows us the feelings. We're linking back to the question. What on earth? Scott tells the reader they have suffered bad luck on the trip as they had more than our share of ill fortune, and he shows his bewilderment with his rhetorical question, what on earth? So I've changed it up a little bit there of my structure, but I've still got my point, evidence, technique and explanation. All very, very wet. He gets his frustrations across well. So again, I'm linking back to the question, I'm giving my opinion on whether I think the writer has done something well. He gets his frustrations across well when he describes the tent as all very, very wet. This repetition of the adjective emphasises how soaked their living quarters are, and they will be mighty uncomfortable. So see how they've got that trick of, if I can get another quote in there, I'm going to use another quote to show that I'm tracking through the text. Miserable, utterly miserable. Scott explicitly shows us his state of mind, so that means he's doing it in a really obvious way, when on the next day he's miserable, utterly miserable. The repetition of miserable emphasises unhappiness, and the adverb utterly suggests he's completely dissatisfied with his situation. The use of the aggressive adverb, again I'm using that adjective to describe his technique, violently, and the verb rage to describe the storm, suggests the blizzard is harming Scott literally and figuratively. The reader can feel Scott's pain. So I'm saying that using the word violently and rage rage almost suggests that it's hurting him physically, like violently, so it's actually hurting him, and also sort of mentally and emotionally and metaphorically it's hurting him. And also I've done a little sentence at the end just to show how it's affecting the reader, so the reader can feel Scott's pain by these adverbs. Steadily and hopeless feeling descends. We feel Scott's mood is becoming more desperate as the situation is getting worse. The adverb steadily to describe the snow climbing suggests he is slowly being engulfed in the storm, and the hopeless feeling descends suggests Scott is almost submitting to the storm's power. A break at last and but. I feel Scott's feelings become more positive, so I'm commenting on change of feelings. As he says there is a break at last, and the use of but when describing his cup of tea suggests he is grateful for some sanctuary from the bleakness. So I'm saying that Scott really gets across well that he is a bit of a change in personality, change of feeling, and I'm just saying that despite all the awful stuff, because he's used the word but, it's almost suggesting, well, there was some upside to something. Now serious, no sign, and utterly impossible. However, we sense a negative change. Again, I've gone back, I'm changing feelings. In Scott's feelings on the third day when he feels the situation is hopeless. He thinks the situation is now serious and they have to sacrifice the animals, which means the expedition will become even more difficult, because obviously they're using the animals to carry stuff. If they haven't got them, they've got to do it themselves. The repetition of no sign shows Scott sees no way out of the situation, and utterly impossible suggests Scott has lost some hope of completing the expedition. So I've got 4 quotes in there, and I'm explaining why that shows the negativity and how Scott feels hopeless. So again, there they all are together as an 8. You have to do 6. Okay, and there it all is on one page. So I'll put this up on Moodle so you can download this and see what like a grade 9, what a really good answer looks like. Here's a grade 2 example. So first of all, you'll see there's a limited response, not enough quotes by a million miles, not enough depth. Also, they haven't really evaluated and said why or how the writer is used language. Here's a grade 4 or 5 example, so if you want to pause, read it through. So there is some relevant stuff in there. However, sometimes it goes off onto a tangent. Basically, not a lot of the time it's not accurate, not convincing. They haven't used the right quotes, but still they've only used 4 or 5 quotes. We want to really get to that 6, 7 to push us really up. Also, they haven't commented on change, so we want to comment on change. So band explanations. So when you're talking about your explanations, we want to zoom in on the word. So we've zoomed in on raging and said it's volatile, it's violent. We've zoomed in on thin to say that it sounds weak, fragile. What we don't want you to do is use a quote and then say things like, it makes the reader want to read on. It puts an image in the reader's mind. It makes it interesting for the reader. All of these things are statements and vague and can be made about any text. And to be frank, they're made by students who don't really know what to put. So remember, pick a quote and just say why that word has been used. So remember, for question 4, it's 10 marks. You're going to get 6 to 8 points, please, with quotes. What are the marks given? Clear points with quote, quotes to support point, terminology, but not all the time, giving your opinion, really important for this question, and you need to avoid waffling. So if you look at all my ones, okay, if you look at my ones here, they're all 2 sentences. Some of them might be 3, but all 2 sentences, 3 sentences. What we don't want is an 8 sentence PE where really you're going to be lucky to get 2 marks and you're going to waste a lot of time. So it'd be really important that you don't really waffle. If you follow all these tips, hopefully you will be really successful in this question.